Welcome into 5-Wide Fantasy. Today's video going over the best fantasy football running back schedules for the playoffs of this season. We've got 5 teams here we're going to cover. Talk about the backfield, the rotation, who are some players you want to buy, whether or not these schedules are legit, whether or not you should be trading for these players. These are guys that can help you win your fantasy championship. At the end of the day, all you want to do is get to the playoffs and anything can happen. Some of these trades as we get closer to your trade deadline could be the difference between making the championship and winning a championship. So stick around. 5 teams here who have some of the best schedules. If you guys enjoy the video, be sure to drop a like, subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed, and go check out our partners over at Betfred. All season long, bet $50. So you just have to sign up, register, deposit $50, bet $50 on any market, and they'll give you $250 in free bets. That link down below to sign up is in the description. Let's get to the first team here. It is the Detroit Lions. The Lions have one of the best schedules in fantasy football for running backs. Now, how do we navigate this backfield? We'll get to that in a moment, but let's look at the schedule here. The Jets are where they open things up, which isn't a great matchup. The Jets actually are very, very good against the run. They have they allow the 7th least amount of fantasy points to running backs on the season. But to follow that up, we have the Carolina Panthers and the Chicago Bears, who are 30th and 29th respectively in fantasy points allowed to running backs. This is a Lions team that is running the ball quite a bit on the season. They're 12th in rushing play percentage. They're running the ball 27.2 times per game. And inside the red zone, those valuable carries where those touchdowns are coming from, where Jamal Williams has been an absolute machine this year. The team is running the ball at a 55% rate inside the 20, which is top 10 in the NFL. And Williams leads the team and leads the league in inside the 5 carries with 16 inside the 5 carries and 6 touchdowns on those carries. He's tied for the most red zone carries as well. So obviously Williams being that valuable piece of this offense that you probably want to have, that this is where they're kind of converting those opportunities and running the ball the most is inside the red zone. And Carolina and Chicago are 2 of the 6 teams in the NFL that are giving up more than 1 rushing touchdown per game to the running back position. So those are 2 teams where you're probably going to score. We saw Jamal Williams do it just this past week against the Bears. So now, where does this land in terms of the split in the backfield? We've got Williams, we've got Swift, and then Justin Jackson, 17 snaps last week. Like, what is going on here, Dan Campbell? Like, why are we adding another guy to the mix? And Justin Jackson, just such a middling level option that I just don't understand why they're including a third back here. Jackson even had 4 carries last week. But the edge between Williams and Swift is starting to come closer. Williams had 25 snaps. Swift had 19. Swift definitely playing more of that pass catcher role. It's still to be determined as to whether or not he's going to be able to, get a bit more opportunities, inside the 20, on the ground. I think the player to look at here is Williams. I think he's a player you're going to for some reason, you could probably get for cheaper than Swift. I've been high on Swift. I had him as a second-half league winner, but the way that this injury is shaking out and their lack of usage with him because of that injury, it has me skeptical as to whether or not this is going to be a guy that takes over in the playoff time, come playoff time. And Williams probably is the cheaper option. So Lions, great matchups, potential to exploit this opportunity before your trade deadline. The second team we've got here, those New York Jets that are playing the Lions in the first week of the fantasy playoffs. The Lions, 27th in fantasy points allowed to running backs. Then they go Jacksonville, who are 19th, and Seattle, who are 25th in fantasy points allowed to running backs. So another team here where we do have a split backfield. So let's get into those touches, who's leading the way, what do I project in terms of in this crucial stretch here for the fantasy season, who's going to be the one that benefits the most from this schedule. Carter and Robinson have seen a pretty close split. If you look at the last 2 weeks, those are the 2 weeks that Robinson has been in town and been playing and had a role. Week 8, the splits were 33-13 for Carter. In week 9, 31-24 for Carter. So how I see this breaking down from this offense, Robinson looks to be the guy that'll take a decent share of the rushing work. He's not going to take it all, but I think as we get to that point of the season, he'll probably have the slight edge on the ground. Now, Carter's been more efficient and been more valuable from a fantasy perspective on a per-touch basis compared to Robinson, but I think the reason they acquired Robinson is to be able to help them be better on the ground and kind of reclaim that performance from Breece Hall the rest of the way. But Carter is the guy that will have the edge as the receiver, much like it was in Jacksonville between Robinson and Etienne. I think Carter has the lion's share, pretty much the majority by the end of the season, if not all of the receiving work, much like it was like in Jacksonville. So that's how I see this breaking down. And if you're looking at the matchups here, Jacksonville and Seattle stick out in terms of their susceptibility to receiving backs. The Jags are allowing 6.9 receptions per game to the running back position, and Seattle's allowing 6.3. So I think between the two, the guy you want to target is Michael Carter. Again, both can provide value, but if I'm looking at these matchups, I think Carter has the chance to be more effective, and I do think there's a better chance that Carter's the guy that has the majority of touches in this offense when you combine both rushing and receiving, and the upside here in terms of these matchups comes in the receiving game. So I would be looking to Carter as the player to buy in this offense. Next up is the San Francisco 49ers. The 49ers have an excellent schedule. They're going to Seattle in the first week of the fantasy playoffs in week 15. Week 16 is the Washington Commanders, who have been good against the run, but 18th in fantasy points. So, this is still a matchup that they could be productive in. And then the Raiders wrap things up, who are 26th in fantasy points allowed to backs. Now, Washington, again, like I mentioned, is a tough matchup, but this is a team that lives on the ground. Their efficiency, their work, their scoring is going to come through the ground game. They're top 10 in rushing attempts per game. Now, the big problem here and concern for me, and when it comes to CMC and like, am I going to buy CMC because of this schedule, is the share of the offense, the kind of hot hand approach. Kyle Shanahan, that massive ego he has, he just wants to prove that no matter who's in that backfield, he can make sure that they're an efficient, successful back. Now, CMC had a significant advantage over Elijah Mitchell this past week in terms of snaps, 46-25 edge, significant edge there. CMC is always going to be the guy on the field in those passing down situations. Like even last season, obviously Mitchell was involved in the receiving game, but this is not an ideal scenario. Mitchell's not the greatest receiving back. They want CMC to be that guy. How could you not? And then my other concern, though, is like once they got inside the 20 on Sunday night, Eli Mitchell would come into the game. Not to say CMC wasn't getting any red zone work, because obviously he found the end zone, but it seems like they see Mitchell as that bruiser who's more likely to be getting work in those really valuable situations. I don't think I want to rush to try to trade for CMC, but I think Mitchell is an interesting play. It's going to be tough in some of your more shallow leagues, like a 10-team league, to rely on Mitchell and actually start him in these matchups. But I think if you're in a deeper league, Mitchell is honestly worthy of a speculative trade here. I don't think you have to give up a significant amount. Maybe coming off this past week, you might have to give up more than you'd like. But this is a team that's going to lean on the run game. I think they obviously like both of these guys. Kyle Shanahan's scheme. The offensive line is healthy. I think this is a team that's definitely going to rely on the run game quite a bit down the stretch, and especially in those matchups, like I mentioned. The next team up is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, a team that has not been able to run the ball well at all this year. But if you look at those matchups, they're very, very good. Cincinnati not being the greatest of matchups. Cincinnati's 11th in fantasy points allowed to running backs, but Arizona and Carolina 24th and 30th respectively to the position. So this is a team obviously with the lowest run volume, the lowest running split in the NFL in the run-pass ratio. Only 34% of plays are they running the ball, but they run the fourth most plays in the NFL, so that elevates how many times they are running the ball. And then as well, obviously the running backs play a very important role in this passing game in Tampa Bay. They have a near 20% target share on the season. So having the pass catchers with this team at the running back position still is going to elevate value to these guys in these plus matchups in the fantasy playoffs. Arizona and Carolina, if you pointing those two out specifically. Now, again, the Bucs did lose to Carolina, but I do see these as games that give them positive game scripts, which ultimately lifts and elevates the floor of the lead running back in this offense. In those positive game scripts, they're just more likely to run the football. I think both of these teams will just be kind of a dead man walking by this time of the year. They won't really have much to be playing for. Fournette, expected to be good to go coming off that hip pointer injury from last week against Seattle. So this is going to be a split. But, I mean, we saw Rachaad White, like we talked about in the waiver wire video. He had the start this past week. Like I think that speaks volumes to where this team is going with this offense and with this backfield. I think if anything, Rachaad White would be the player you want to buy. Now, I think it's a tough spot to do so coming off of, obviously it wasn't the most productive fantasy week, but anyone who sees 100 yards rushing is going to, your eyeballs are going to widen. You're going to be thinking that this guy's in for a great rest of season. Do I want to buy the Bucs running backs? I think I'd probably lean against it. I think this is still going to be a split. I know these are good matchups, but I think this is more a vote of confidence if you have these guys, like, hey, they're going to be valuable to you potentially at the end of the year. But trading for, I just don't see this being the right time for either one of these guys, because Fournette to me is honestly not someone I'm looking to trade for right now. It's too much of a downward trend in terms of his share of this offense for me to want to go and get him. Last team up is the Tennessee Titans. I mean, is there really much else to say when it comes to the fact that he gets to play the second last and last teams ranked second last and last in fantasy points allowed to running backs? Like Los Angeles and Houston in the first 2 weeks. You have Derrick Henry, you're going to be playing for a fantasy championship. So congratulations if you have him. If you don't have him, go trade the farm and go get him. Dallas comes in for the playoff matchup, but that's not really a concern to me. This team is running the ball 30 times a game. And like I mentioned, those two teams have absolutely no answer to the run game. The Chargers just lost 2 more defensive linemen for the rest of the season in the matchup against San Francisco. They are going to be easily had in the run game. And I mean, we all know about Derrick Henry against the Houston Texans. In his career, he's averaging 19 carries for 114 yards and a touchdown. Like, that's his average. But if you look at the last 4 games, he's averaging over 200 yards rushing and over 2 touchdowns per game in his last 4 games. Like, he's going to be able to run for 150 plus yards without issue against the Texans, and he might put up 40 fantasy points. So if you don't have Derrick Henry, I would try to do everything I can to add him, because these matchups are ridiculous and he's just going to carry you there. And then even in the fantasy championship, like the Cowboys are 4th in fantasy points allowed to running backs, but I think there's a little bit of a disguise in terms of how this has happened. They're 26th in run defense grade, and they're actually a bottom 10 team in rushing yards allowed to running backs. The thing that's kept them and elevated them into this like elite tier of fantasy points allowed is the fact they're allowing less than half a rushing touchdown per game. And very little in the receiving game to running backs. That's not really a concern for me with Derrick Henry. Like, he's going to get 30 touches. If there's any scoring opportunity, it's going to go to Derrick Henry. The pass game is just not something they're doing at a high volume in Tennessee. So Derrick Henry is probably going to win you your league. So if you can go get him, I would do whatever I can to do it. I don't know how you're going to do it. Like, it's going to have to be a CMC or like a Kenneth Walker, or I don't know. It's going to have to be multiple players packaged together, and usually that's a tough thing to do, but whatever you can. Like, if you're in a keeper league, maybe it's going to take some picks. Whatever it is you need to do, I would try to go get Derrick Henry wherever I can. So those are the 5 teams with the best playoff schedule in fantasy football for the 2022 season. If you guys enjoyed the video, let me know. Drop a like, subscribe to the channel, drop any trade questions you have for me down below in the comments. Thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you next time.